UFC Vegas 89 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to get things started in the heavyweight division as Mick Parkin comes in as a minus 142 favorite. The comeback on Muhammad Usman is plus 120. And this is your typical heavyweight slop type of matchup because on one hand, we have Mick Parkin who, despite looking good and impressing people in his UFC debut, myself included, he followed that up with a really lackluster performance against Kai Machado his last time out. Now, he did get the victory, but for starters, Kai Machado, very bottom of the barrel in terms of UFC level talent. And on top of that, Mick Parkin just did not look good in that fight. He relied on his takedowns, didn't have a ton of volume on the feet, didn't really carry any power, and that was a matchup where you would expect Mick Parkin to have more volume down the stretch, to use that cardio as a weapon, and he just didn't really do that. It was a very competitive fight, played out really close, and he just honestly did not look good to me. And then on the flip side, you have Muhammad Usman, who I also just don't rate super highly either. Yes, he's won a couple UFC fights, but he's also been very fortunate to win a couple of those fights. Now, he did look better in his last fight out against Jake Collier, where a lot of people expected Collier's volume to be the difference maker. Usman was able to up the volume because prior to that, he was super, super low volume, and he's not a high volume guy to begin with, but very low volume, wants to keep his distance, go for a takedown or two when he can. And this is just a matchup where I'm okay with siding with a guy like Usman, who I still don't rate super highly, but I just think it's a competitive matchup because both of these guys are slow and plodding on the feet. And I think Usman carries more power, and I think Usman's actually the better wrestler as well. So I'm going to side with Usman here in that type of situation. If it's going to be close, I'd rather take the underdog here. We're going to say Usman by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up's in the flyweight division, and somebody's O has got to go because we have two undefeated prospects here, both off the Contender Series last season. We'll start with Andre Lima. He's a minus 180 favorite. The comeback on Igor de Silva is plus 150. And we'll start on the Lima side. He comes from a high-level kickboxing background. He's actually a two-time South American kickboxing world champion. And we saw on the Contender Series, you see that in his striking. He's very flashy, very explosive, and very powerful. And he fought Rickson Zenedem, who basically was just trying not to get knocked out in that fight. He was on his bicycle the entire time, and Lima kind of struggled to really cut off the cage and kind of keep him still enough to land one of those big shots. But you see the power when he does throw. He's not a super high volume guy, but when he lands, that power is different. And I would expect the power to be the difference maker in this matchup against Igor de Silva, who I also think is a pretty solid prospect as well. He's only 20 years old. He's improving from fight to fight. This is the former flyweight jungle fight champion, and he's got a pretty well-rounded skill set. He's got a strong jab. He likes to move forward, has some solid leg kicks as well, and he's actually gone to the wrestling in most of his fights, even did a little bit in that Contender Series fight. And I'd say his biggest asset is probably his cardio because he keeps a hellish pace and doesn't really let up. Now, the concern with him, particularly in this matchup, is when he's all gas, no brakes, he's not worrying about his defense. And in some of those exchanges in the phone booth, he leaves himself wide open to being countered. And that's a problem to me against Andre Lima because I think it's very clear between these two fighters that Lima has much more power. So when Lima lands and he lands clean, I think it's going to make a big difference. Whereas de Silva, I think he needs the volume, the pace, weaponize that cardio over 15 minutes. I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that if Lima is landing the bigger shots. So we're going to go with Lima here. Lima by decision is the official pick. A knockout wouldn't shock me, but because de Silva's been pretty durable throughout and Lima's not really a high volume guy, I lean that it does hit the judges' scorecards, but we're going to side with Lima. I think he gets his hand raised here. Next fight up, we have a UFC debutant fighter, Daria Zelenova, a minus 218 favorite. The comeback on Montserrat Renon is plus 180. And we'll start on the Zelenova side. She is a Russian striker, 8-1 prospect. Multiple wins by knockout, but that came against mostly older, low-level regional talent. Now, she does definitely carry some power for the division, but her striking is kind of limited in the sense that it's basically just 1-2s on repeat. Like, she doesn't have any other tools. She literally will just throw 1-2 combinations on repeat and try to land something big. So she's definitely one-dimensional in that sense. Now, she's not easy to take to the ground, but if you are able to get her to the ground, she doesn't really seem to have much of a get-up game, and I just think she needs to keep the fight on the feet, and that's going to be a key in this matchup against Montserrat Renon, who basically is the reverse. She needs to get the fight to the ground. On the feet, she is not a great boxer. She's very slow, very hittable as well. And if she gets stuck on the feet here, I think she's going to get boxed up. But if she's able to get the takedown, she does hold a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's an okay wrestler. If she takes you down, she's certainly going to be a live dog in this fight. The problem is I could just see her struggling to get those takedowns. And if she's unable to do that, I think it starts to look kind of like a blowout on the feet in favor of Zelenova. So we're going to side with Zelenova by decision. I have zero interest in laying this price on a debutante fighter that is so one-dimensional. And I just think she's a little bit too expensive on DraftKings because I just don't see the ceiling. Like, unless you expect her to be this huge knockout threat like her record suggests, and I don't really expect that, then I don't think you can pay this price for her, not on a full slate, on a 13-fight card on Saturday. So I just have no interest in her on DraftKings. And even though I'm picking Renon to lose, I do like targeting her a little bit as an underdog, just because if she were to pull off that victory, like she did in her UFC debut as an underdog, it likely comes from multiple takedowns, grappling, and at her price, she doesn't need to do a ton. So I'm going to have more shares of the underdog here, but the official pick is going to be Zelenova by decision. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Stephen Wynn, a minus 198 favorite. The comeback on Jarno Aarons is plus 168. And this is a matchup where we have another Contender Series guy from this past season. He actually fought on 3 separate occasions on the Contender Series. Stephen Wynn, he trains out of Fortis. He's a 9-1 professional fighter. 7 of his 9 wins have come inside the distance, but he doesn't carry a ton of power on the feet despite being primarily a striker. Now, he does have some pretty solid boxing, some good combinations, and he can keep a decent pace over 15 minutes if he needs to. He's very technically sound on the feet, but I think he needs to keep it on the feet because he's very one-dimensional, doesn't really have a ton of grappling, and I think better grapplers in the UFC will be able to take advantage of him and take him down and control him. I just don't think Jarno Aarons is that guy. Aarons has multiple submission victories on his record, but his grappling is not very good. It mostly was opportunistic subs against low-level regional talent. It just hasn't translated to the UFC level. In fact, he's actually been taken down and out-grappled on multiple occasions. He's 0-2 in the UFC, likely fighting for his job here. And I just don't see a path for him unless he's able to, hurt Stephen Wynn like Elon Cruz was able to do on Contender Series with that flying knee. Unless Aarons is going to be able to land something big, I just think he's dropping rounds here at a pretty high clip because Stephen Wynn's the better striker. He's going to be throwing more volume. And outside of the leg kicks, I just don't think Aarons is going to be able to present many problems for Stephen Wynn. So I expect Stephen Wynn to outpoint him over 15 minutes. We're going Wynn by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Miles Johns, a small favorite at minus 148. The comeback on Cody Gibson is plus 124. And this is a fun matchup because on one hand, we have Miles Johns, who's coming off a decision win over Dan Argueta. It was later overturned to a no contest because of a failed drug test on the John side. So he served a suspension. Now he's back inside the octagon this weekend, and he's coming in on somewhat short notice here, which is a concern because in previous fights, we know that Johns has faded after about the 7.5 minute mark. The later half of these fights, he's definitely getting tired. And I think that could be a reason why we really haven't seen him go to the wrestling at the UFC level. This dude was a standout wrestler in high school, wrestled on the Contender Series as well, and then once he's come to the UFC, he barely uses it. He's basically turned into a pure boxer. Now, his boxing is pretty solid as well, and he's got power for his size, but the cardio is the main concern. So somebody like Cody Gibson, who is coming off that fight against Brad Katana that was fought at an absolute hellish pace over 15 minutes. These guys went to absolute war. That was my vote for fight of the year last year. Now, I'm not saying Gibson's going to bring that type of pace, but if that dude wakes up and he rocks up on Saturday and brings that type of fight to Johns, he might melt him down the stretch. Now, I just have concerns with Gibson for the simple fact that he's getting older now. He turns 37 years old later this year. He's also had previous knee injuries as well. And he's also got, some striking defensive holes that I think Miles Johns might be able, to land some big shots and then kind of use that footwork to dance around the cage and kind of evade some of the counters of Gibson. So this is one where I'm going to slightly side with Miles Johns here despite the cardio concerns. And if we start to see Miles Johns start to fade, then it might be a time to hop on Gibson live if you have that availability. And speaking of, we just dropped a new feature on fightnumbers.com. We have an exclusive odds screen solely dedicated to UFC, and it updates in real time for live betting. It works on mobile as well. So as I was saying, a fight like this, Johns versus Gibson, as soon as you see Johns start to fade, refresh that odds screen, see what the live prices are. It's just one way to help you guys out so that you're not logged in at 10 different places on 15 different screens trying to get the best price. This will tell you whatever prices are available. That way you know exactly what book to log into to place that bet before these live odds move. So it's just one of the new features we added over at fightnumbers.com. And if you hit the toggle screen, it'll show the best prices pre-flop for money line and over-unders. The props are coming as well. A bunch of people have asked me. It is coming. We are still working. By signing up for the betting package, not only do you get the odds screen here, the live betting capability, you get access to Evan, Pepe, Aussie, 3 of the best handicappers in the industry for UFC, all at fightnumbers.com. I'm super excited about it. I will post a link in the description and in the comments for you guys to check it out. Any questions, be sure to hit me up. Now back to the fight. Next fight up, we have Ricardo Ramos, a minus 162 favorite. The comeback on Julian Erosa is plus 136. And these are 2 guys that you just absolutely cannot trust, because both of them are capable of finishing each other, but they're also very capable of getting finished. Now, Ramos is coming off that first round submission loss to Charles Jourdain. I actually bet him in that spot, so it was super unfortunate. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to be betting him here against Julian Erosa, even though I think he could potentially take advantage of the durability concerns on the Erosa side. But I also think Erosa could take advantage of the Ramos durability concerns. Ramos has been finished multiple times as well. Erosa, yes, he's been knocked out, seems like a million times. He's been knocked out 7 times in his career, but you're gonna have to knock this dude out to get him out of there. He's never been submitted in his career, and he's gonna keep coming as long as he's conscious. And I can't say the same for Ricardo Ramos. So in a fight that I think both guys have finishing upside, both guys have being finished downside, I'm going to lean into the variance and target the underdog more so, because I just trust him to fight for my money a little bit more. And I think over 15 minutes, if the fight were to get extended, I trust his cardio more. And I just honestly think Ramos is more of a quitter than Erosa, despite Erosa having the clear chin issues. So I'm going to side with Erosa. We're going Erosa by TKO. It's one for DraftKings. I think you want to target both sides. This is a 13 fight slate. There's not a ton of fights that I absolutely love. This is one of them where I feel pretty confident the winner is going to compete for the optimal lineup. So I'm going to side with Erosa, target both sides, and hope that the dog comes through. Which brings us to our next fight, as Trey Ogden is a minus 148 favorite. The comeback on Kurt Holobaugh is plus 124. And we'll start on the Ogden side. He's coming off that controversial early stoppage against Nicholas Mota. They ruled it a no contest, but real ones know Trey Ogden was actually dominating in that fight. He looked career best, I thought, against Nicholas Mota his last time out. And that goes for Kurt Holobaugh as well, because he finished Austin Hubbard in exciting fashion, and I was pretty surprised. I had an over in that fight against Holobaugh and Hubbard, expected it to be kind of low pace, decision, boring, and it was kind of fireworks from the opening bell. Holobaugh ended up getting the finish there. But this is one where I do have some concerns for Kurt Holobaugh. For starters, he's definitely on the back end of his career. I don't want to overrate that performance against Austin Hubbard. He turns 38 years old later this year. And against Trey Ogden, a guy who at times has looked a lot better than I gave him credit for. You know, he rocked up against Daniel Zellhuber and outstruck him. He also had other times where he just didn't show up, right? Like against Jordan Levitt, where Jordan Levitt actually outlanded him on the feet. So this guy's kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in terms of his striking, but he's also got some opportunistic submissions. Most of his wins have actually come by submission, despite him not really using his wrestling as much as he should. But I think he can go back to that here, because not only do I expect him to be the cleaner striker on the feet, I think he does have the wrestling advantage because Halaba's never been able to defend takedowns. I mentioned the age. He's starting to slow down. He defends takedowns around 50% in the UFC. So this is one where I think Ogden's just all around the cleaner striker, despite not having as much power as Halaba. But I also think Ogden might be able to just lean on the wrestling and the grappling a little bit more than we've seen him do in the past. So for that reason, I'm going to side with Ogden. It's not a fight that I love on DraftKings, but because they are priced pretty affordably, I will have some exposure to it. We're going Ogden by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Fernando Padilla, minus 166 favorite. The comeback on Luis Puello is plus 140. And we'll start on the Padilla side. He actually kind of laid an egg against Kyle Nelson, ended up losing as a favorite in that spot. And that was kind of a rough look for him. You know, he burst onto the UFC with a big knockout over Julian Erosa and then loses a decision to Kyle Nelson. So certainly not the greatest look here. I'm actually kind of surprised to see him still getting some respect in the betting market as a sizable favorite against somebody like Puello, who came through as an underdog on the Contender Series. I bet him big in that spot against Robbie Ring, and I expected him to have the power, the volume edge, the better boxing on the feet, and that's what it came down to. And I kind of expect some of the same here. Padilla is more of a counter striker. He does have some power, but he's not a high volume guy. He's not a good minute winner. And I expect Puello to do what he always does, and that's move forward. He wants to fight in the phone booth and just land heavy combinations. And this guy does have big power. Most of his wins have come by knockout, and he's going to carry that power for 15 minutes if he needs to. His cardio checks out to me, and I don't think his takedown defense is very good, but he's not going to accept position. He's constantly working, and I just expect him to be the dog here. You know, similar to that Danny Silva, Josh Kalebo fight last week, and why I bet Danny Silva was because it was a similar dynamic. You have one guy who's not a high volume guy, basically a counter striker, not somebody that I think is a good minute winner in Padilla. And I said the same thing about Josh Kalebo. And then on the flip side, you have another guy on the other side who's a little bit more raw, not as technically sound, but we know he's going to move forward. We know he's going to throw volume. And in this case, I actually think Puello is the cleaner boxer with more power. So I'm going to side with Puello. I'm going to say by decision. I'm picking a lot of decisions this card. I'm definitely interested in some overs and GTDs, but I wouldn't be super shocked if he was the first person to knock out Padilla either. Either way, he's one of my favorite underdogs on the card. We're going Puello. I think he gets his hand raised this weekend. Which brings us to our next matchup, another one in the featherweight division. This one's Billy Quarantillo, a minus 148 favorite now. The comeback on Youssef Zalal is plus 124. And I got to be honest, I'm surprised with the respect that Zalal is getting in this spot because he's coming off a long layoff, about a year and a half, and he's coming off that fight against Damon Blackshear where it ended up resulting in a draw. He basically got grappled for the first 2 rounds, came out strong in the third, and that's really one of his better skill sets is his ability to fight for 15 minutes. He's always had solid cardio, but he doesn't really have a great skill set. You know, he's an okay striker, leg kicks, solid jab, doesn't really carry any type of power, and can give up the takedowns, only defends at about 60%. We've seen him out-grappled multiple times. Now, on the flip side, Billy Quarantillo, we know what he brings to the table. He is a pace warrior. This dude is going to bring it to you for 15 minutes if he needs to, and he is nonstop go, go, go action, whether it's in terms of the striking or mixing in the takedowns. He's the better submission grappler in this fight as well, and I expect his volume to be there over 15 minutes. So I like the Quarantillo side. He's the one also with the full camp. He was supposed to fight Gabriel Miranda, who pulled out of this fight. So I think all signs point to Quarantillo here. I think he's affordable enough on DraftKings that even in a decision, I'd expect him to score pretty well. So we're going Quarantillo by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next fight in the bantamweight division. We have a banger matchup between 2 young prospects with Peyton Talbot, who's coming off a 3rd round submission win over Nick Aguirre, and he's facing Cameron Simon, who suffered his first professional loss at the hands of none other than Christian Rodriguez, who seems to be just derailing everybody's hype train. You know, we just saw him last week against Isaac Dolgarian. We saw him previously against Raul Rosas Jr. Like, all this dude does is beat these undefeated prospects, and he did it to Cameron Simon as well. So Simon's looking to get back in the win column here, but this is a tough spot for him in a fight where I think both of these guys are very similar. You know, Peyton Talbot, very powerful striker, wants to move forward. He's constantly pressuring his opponents. He's one of those guys that likes to build into his fights. He's talked about it in multiple interviews where he likes to get his reads in the first round, and then typically in rounds 2 and round 3 is when you see him start to gas pedal these opponents, and he's someone that's gonna carry that power for 15 minutes. You can take him down and try to grapple him. It's just very hard to hold him down. And on the flip side, Cameron Simon's very similar to Talbot in the sense that he's got great cardio. He tends to break his opponents over 15 minutes because he carries that power for 15 minutes. Now, where I have concerns with him here is I don't really expect him to have a ton of wrestling success in this matchup. I expect it to play out mostly on the feet. And if that's the case, I think Talbot's just a little bit more powerful. I think Simon's just a little bit more defensively flawed. I think he wears the damage worse as well. So in a fight where I think it's going to be very close, it's just a little bit of those intangibles have me slightly favoring the Talbot side. So we're going to go Talbot. I think it goes the full 15 minutes. We're going Talbot by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Edmund Shabazian, a minus 205 favorite. The comeback on AJ Dobson is plus 170. And we'll start on the Shabazian side. This dude started his career 11-0. Since then, he's lost 4 of his last 5 fights, with his only win in there coming against Dalka Longiambola. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like this dude was being built as this super prospect, and then once you started to face the better fighters in this division, it became very clear very quickly that he had clear issues in his game, and mainly due to the gas tank, right? Like, after that first round, he kind of turns into a pumpkin, and that cardio starts to cliff dive. And when that happens, he becomes extremely stationary on the feet, extremely hittable as well. And then you can start to grapple him because he's just not giving much resistance to anything. So I just don't see how you can justify laying this type of price tag on Shabazian, despite the fact that I do expect him to look good in round 1, because he looks good in round 1 in most of his fights. But outside of that, I have some serious concerns here, and I think a guy like AJ Dobson isn't the most skilled fighter, but he does have multiple skills that I think could present issues for Shabazian. For starters, he's a good boxer, he's durable, he's never been finished in his career, and he's got big power. So I expect Dobson to be the better boxer, especially after that first round. All he needs to do is extend this fight, and I think he'll have a big chance to hurt Shabazian as the fight gets extended. So I like the underdog here. We're going AJ Dobson by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event, as Carl Williams is a minus 185 favorite. The comeback on Justin Tafa is plus 154. Now, what's interesting is Junior Tafa stepped in a couple weeks ago to replace Justin Tafa against Marcos Rogerio de Lima. And now Junior Tafa, who was scheduled to face Carl Williams, Justin is stepping in to replace him. So kind of interesting how that worked out. But in terms of the matchup, Carl Williams, we know what he brings to the table. This dude's a high volume wrestler. We saw him wrestle at a high level on the Contender Series. We saw him follow that up against Lucas Brzeski and land multiple takedowns in that spot. Now, he is very one-dimensional in that his striking is no good. He cannot fight at space. He cannot keep this fight on the feet because he will probably get knocked out, to be honest with you, but he's very good at getting the fight to the ground. So that's why we like him here, and he can rack up those takedowns, which tends to score well on DraftKings. The issue is, or the concern here with Williams, is that he's facing a very powerful puncher in Justin Tafa. This dude has big power. All of his wins have come by knockout, and this is one where it's just super binary in the sense that if Tafa can keep the fight on the feet, he's going to win by knockout. If Tafa gets taken down, he's going to either get finished on the mat or just get taken down multiple times and lose a decision. I think either of those scenarios, the fight's going to score well on DraftKings. So this is one of the fights that I'm definitely looking to have exposure to both sides and be overweight to the field. But it's one where I'm less confident than the market seems to be on Williams because he didn't really look that great to me against Chase Sherman. And I think Tafa's better than Chase Sherman. Maybe that's a hot take. And I think Tafa is more likely to land something big than Chase Sherman was. So I have more concerns than the market seems to at this price tag, but I am going to side with Williams. I think him winning a decision is the more likely outcome. But in terms of DraftKings, again, I'm just going to look to get overweight to both sides. Which brings us to our main event this week. This one's in the women's flyweight division as Rose Namajunas takes on Amanda Ribas. She's currently a minus 245 favorite with Ribas on the comeback at plus 200. And we'll start on the Namajunas side. Rose was one of the better fighters at strawweight. We know that she was a contender there, former champion, of course. It's yet to be determined if she can be a contender in this division. I know it doesn't make a huge difference, but we saw her debut against Manon Fiorot, and I'm just not as convinced as the market seems to be that her power and finishing ability is going to translate to this weight class. And I know that sounds kind of funny because she's facing Amanda Ribas, who's very good at getting rocked, at getting knocked out. She's been knocked out 3 times in her career. But I just think what this is being priced as is like if Rose was like a Francis Ngannou. Like that, it's seriously giving her that much respect in terms of like knockout props and this fight to finish. Like I like the overs in this fight. I think GTD should be favored in this fight because outside of Ribas getting head kick TKO'd here, I struggle to see how this fight finishes. Like maybe Rose quits down the stretch if Amanda's really putting it on her. I don't, outside of that head kick, which is a concern with Ribas, you know, she does that dive out of range and throw her hands up like this. Like she can certainly be caught. And that's what hurt her against Macy Barber. What started the finish there was a head kick. So that is in the back of my mind. But man, outside of that, I think Ribas is going to be super competitive here. Wouldn't be surprised to see her win the early rounds. This is somebody that likes to, move forward pressure. She's got a solid jab. She'll mix in the leg kicks as well. She's strong with that judo hip toss as well. And Rose, we just haven't really seen the volume from her lately. That's another reason why I like overs in this fight. Like both of these fighters move around a ton. They're both on their bicycle. They both like to keep space at times as well. Like I could just see this being, especially for the first couple rounds, low volume, both of them dancing around the outside, doing their little, Amanda's doing her karate thing. Rose is just circling around a bunch, feinting. Like, I just don't expect it to be this great high-paced action war. And if that's the case, I have to expect Ribas to be very competitive here unless she gets hurt. So I get making Rose as like a small favorite if you think she can manage her cardio over 5 rounds better, if you think she really does have a good chance to hurt Amanda Ribas. But outside of that, man, I can't get to this number. I'm going to go with Ribas here. I think in terms of DraftKings, the pick is clearly Amanda Ribas, mainly due to price, because at her price, basically any win is probably going to end up optimal, whereas Rose, I already mentioned, I think it goes the full 25 minutes, and outside of a head kick TKO, she's not going to score even close to what she needs to in order to end up on the optimal lineup. So that's going to be one where I think one of the bigger leverage spots, and we'll talk about this more on the Thursday DraftKings Deep Dive show, I just think one of the bigger leverage spots is going to be to fade Rose Namajunas, because even if she wins, I struggle to see her on the optimal lineup. So I'm going to side with Amanda Ribas. Fingers crossed that she doesn't get her chin checked here. We're going Ribas by decision. That's the official pick. As always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we just went live with the betting package. You get Pepe Silva, Ozzy P, and Evans. All of their bets moving forward every single week will be on fightnumbers.com. You also get exclusive access to the UFC odds screen, which updates in real time for live betting. Couple other things in the pipeline as well and coming soon. So be sure to check it out at fightnumbers.com. And as always, guys, best of luck, and we'll see you next week.